How did I do? Oh my gosh, how did I do? Okay. I feel like that was giving goth. Like, it's... I feel like I could be in a Dracula novel, guys. I really do. I feel like I could be in a Mary Shelley novel with that portrayal. Hello. Welcome. Once more. We're back for another video. Oh my gosh, about 18th century literature, guys. I'm so excited about a read out tonight. I thought it was it's like a vibe for the... this one is just a cider, y'all. Nothing in it. I thought it fit the aesthetic. It looks goth. Does it not? I feel like it looks like it's a Dracula video, like a Dracula novel-esque. Like, I'm wearing a rosary. Like, is that not goth? Like, come on. Give me that satisfaction at least. But yeah, so today I wanted to kind of talk about one of my favorite genres of literature, the Gothic genre. Yes, I know, round of applause. Now, a lot of you may know Gothic literature in the forms of, like, Edgar Allan Poe or Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And yeah, these are, like, traditional depictions of Gothic, you know. But I want to tackle the origins of the Gothic before I get into what we're going to really talk about, which is William Beckfords' Vathek. I know. Or An Arabian Tale by William Beckford, which he wrote in French. I don't know why. But anyway, yeah. So originally, when I was going into this idea of Gothic literature, I had a depiction, you know, Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, that traditional Gothic-esque idea of what it is. And then I started getting into the origins of goth, and you have it stemming in the late 18th century. So towards the end of the 1700s, like the Romanticism, we followed the Good Enlightenment, right? We go to the Enlightenment. Romantics. Boom, boom, boom. And then you have the Gothic, which is really towards the end of the 17th century, or the 18th century. Like, the text I'm going to be talking about today was from 1786. Yeah, 1786. And it's basically towards the end of the 18th century. You had this turn in which science is rapidly evolving, right? Like, we wake up tomorrow, there's vaccines or whatever. And you're like, wow, like, this is really scary for these people whose lives are governed by their faith. Why? They're going to be scared of science, guys. It doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't. Like, I look at them and I'm like, you guys are crazy, but, like, it doesn't make sense to them. And so you have the birth of this Gothic literature. Now, Gothic as an aesthetic kind of existed a little earlier. It was kind of put down by people. They thought it was, like, beneath Roman and Greek. Like, the architecture of it was not as, like, smooth and marble as, like, the Greek or the Roman architecture and sculpture. But the Gothic has, like, a resurgence when, oh gosh, what was his name? Horace Walpole. He basically writes the first bombshell in Gothic literature. It's about a castle, and that kind of becomes a staple for Gothic, which is, like, this horror element and, like, some large fantastical building, like a castle, a tower, and there's something in it that's contrasting the Enlightenment, and it's like a fantasy element interacting with science, and it's interacting with the human's ability to be fearful and our anxiety and our primal anxiety of the unknown. You see that in works like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Edgar Allan Poe, like these things that are supernatural that exist in a world being touched by science and governed by faith, governed by the Enlightenment. It wouldn't make sense. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. And you have Gothic as a pioneering aesthetic that is a fear of the past. It's something that's awakening in us. It's been there, of course. We're always scared. It's our human nature to be fearful, to be anxious about things we don't understand. But the Gothic really plays with that, and it tackles what we don't know, and it manipulates that as a literary device, if that makes sense. But what's really interesting about Gothic literature is its response to like the religious pressure and the religious tension on these people, because Gothic literature has lots of underlying themes around sexuality, desire. It's very taboo for these. You have very taboo displays of desire, of sexuality, of feminism, of morality, of human nature. That would be very like, whoa, like they'd be very anxiety-inducing into the crowd reading them in the 18th century who is unfamiliar with this idea. And it's kind of going off of also the rapidly changing idea of what masculinity and femininity looks like for these people, because we see sentimentalism happening, which is evoking the emotional side of people. The call to be like overly emotional over your intellect. And then Gothic kind of takes that and goes the extra mile. It's telling you, you're going to be scared of this. You don't understand this, and you're going to fear it. You're going to be terrified of it. It's your human nature. But the Gothic is able to do something really interesting with this, and in the way that it's giving power to the unknown, almost. It's giving power to the misunderstood, misrepresented. And I think there's something really creative and really liberating in that as a genre. Now, today in particular, I'm going to talk about William Beckfords, Vathek. And I want to relate this back to what I was talking about with the Gothic underlyings of sexuality and desire, and how we might look at this text as being an early example of queer literature and how it contributes to this idea of queer identity in the 18th century and what it means for Gothic literature in the realm of queer literary theory, and how queerness is allowed a space in Gothic literature. It's allowed an element in which it possesses a power of sort. Of it has space to exist and to be played with and manipulated with by an author, and it's very early fragments of queer identity in these early 18th century or late 18th century texts, especially in the Gothic literature, which I find just so captivating. So first I want to get into a little biographical understanding of who William Beckford was. So him and Horace Walpole, who, if you guys remember, as I said a little bit ago, he was kind of like the daddy of Gothic aestheticism. Like not even just the literature, the architecture. Like Horace Walpole was very rich. Now, William Beckford, who's the author of this text, he was also very rich. Now, his parents acquired money from the disgusting Atlantic slave trade. So, take with that what you will. Not endorsing his family or anything. But they were very rich from their exploitation of, people of color. William Beckford was also a member of Parliament who wrote Gothic literature. Now, what we might think of that as like governmental anxiety around the unknown, I don't know. But that's not the focus of this. He owned a mansion that he converted into a Gothic castle, which he renamed the Foothill Abbey. So he had a lot of money, okay? He wrote Vathek when he was 24. Yeah, 24. I'm 21. 24, he wrote this book. Kind of sets the bar kind of high for me, honestly. But he wrote this book, and it's huge success. Major defining novel of the Gothic period, of the Gothic literature genre. And then William Beckford, as with a lot of politicians, gets in this sex scandal. Ooh, I know. Shocker. And he's found in a compromising position as a 13-year-old boy. I know, guys. I know. And this kind of puts an image on him for the rest of his, like, political career and everything. So nothing he does is ever as successful as Vathek. Just to be understood. He writes Vathek as a text around desire, around like sexual disturbances, and it has something really innately human about it, which I will. Vathek as a text in the summary. Vathek is this guy, and it's like set in the Middle East, so already completely different setting than like a castle on a hill, palace, whatever. It's set in the Middle East. Now, Vathek is a prince of some sort, and he goes to these towers, and so there's these tower aspect of it. But Vathek is obsessed with knowledge. He's obsessed with gaining power and status, and he wants to know everything and have everything in the world. Okay. And this guy, the stranger, who in this story acts as kind of like a demonic symbol, or a demonic figure, if you will, like the devil figure, comes to the palace and he gives Vathek these swords. And he's like, whoa, these are so beautiful, these objects. You've never seen anything like them. And he hasn't. And Vathek's obsessed. He's like, oh my gosh, where did you get these? Like, I have to have it now. I have to have it right now. So he imprisons the stranger. I know. But the stranger gets out somehow. And Vathek is like super depressed. He's like, oh no, whatever will I do? I need to know where I can get this stuff. And so Vathek is like, gets super depressed. And the stranger comes back. And he's like, whoa, don't be depressed, girl. Like, I'm going to heal you. And so he heals him. And Vathek's like, whoa, wow, I am healed. Have a big dinner. And Vathek's like, this guy is gross. He's eating all my food. So Vathek gets mad and starts to beat him. Starts to, like, literally beat him. And he's, like, kicking him on the ground. And then all the people at the dinner party start kicking him on the ground. And the guy is, like, rolled up in a ball. And they kick him, and he's rolling. And then the people in the town come out of their houses and start kicking him around. So they're playing soccer with this man, which is really humorous to read, honestly, if I have to admit. As dark as the text is, hilarious aspect of kicking the man around like a soccer ball. Anyway, they kick him off like a cliff, into a gorge. But he lives. He escapes like that. Anyways, eventually Vathek is forced to confront the genie and confront like authority in the story and realize, oh my gosh, I'm condemned to hell. And then his mother goes to hell with him. It's like a weird relationship that they have. Basically, the story is about Vathek's descent into hell. Now, Vathek's descent into hell is based on his inability to stomach his desire and his inability to, like, withhold himself from that. He's, like, unsatisfied by it. And I want to focus on a particular passage in the text, in the very beginning of the text. And I wanted to focus on some secondary material from Donna Landry in her essay that she wrote about the Gothic and what William Beckford and Horace Walpole were doing in this, which is that the Gothic is the attraction to things that are horrifying, as she says. There's this attractive element to things that are terrifying to us, things that we do not know. And I really want to focus on how Vathek is depicting in the story. So I think, for me, it starts when Vathek loses his pleasure, when he gets rid of the stranger in this text. So Vathek gets rid of the stranger, right? The stranger will not tell him where he got stuff, so Vathek is like, oh my gosh. He gets super depressed because the stranger disappears. He gets super depressed. Nothing's satisfying him. And he says, the text goes, Vathek intimately lost all firmness. A fever seized him, and his appetite failed. So insatisfiable was the thirst which tormented him. Thus, this unhappy prince was incapacitated for his lack of enjoyment of any pleasure. Wow. What a way to say homie is down bad. Like, he is not feeling anything. He's completely devoid of any pleasure once the stranger has left. Keep in mind, the stranger is depicted as this, like, grotesque man, like this awful figure of a man. Like, he, like, barely represents humanity. And Vathek is super, like, super disgusted by him. But I also think Vathek's desires here, I mean, we can really see the weight of it, as he's, without anything to desire, he's devoid of any pleasure at all. Especially, I like the part in the text where it goes, he was not able to satisfy his own, for he was, as all men, the most curious. He's a wanderer. He wants to know. He wants to find this man. He's interested in what this guy has to bring to the table. And the guy's like, bro, peace out. And Vathek's like, no. And so he's kind of depressed for a little bit. And Vathek's mother, Carwithis, who is awful, worst mother of the year award. She's evil. Her desire is that, like, they're going to be the worst of the worst that they can be. Which is like, why? I don't know. But she, in this text, where Vathek, delighted, so the stranger has showed back up to present to Vathek, like, I am here. Vathek's like, oh my gosh, no way. And he goes, delighted to see his desires, Vathek leaped upon the neck of the frightful Indian. So the stranger's from India. He reveals he's from India. And kissed his hand, mouth, and hollow cheeks as though they had been coral lips and of the lilies and roses of his most beautiful wives. Why is this man all up in his business? Making out with him, kissing him on the mouth, on the lips. He's excited. He's having pleasure. Oh my gosh. I don't think I need to, like, emphasize how inherently queer this is. I mean, you devoid him of all pleasure and then introduce a man back into the scene that seems to give him, like, the elixir of life. And I like the next part where the wives, Vathek's wives, drape their veils over their mortification. Nor would the scene have ended here had Coranthus, his mother, not repressed the raptures of her son. The scene wouldn't have ended. He would have done more. They would have kept making out. I like that the wives are a little bit embarrassed too, because they like can see this is kind of weird. Like, this is a little taboo. Like, why are you making out with this guy? But I also want to call attention to the mother interrupting the scene. She's the force that separates Vathek from the object of his desire, another man. She's the wall. And I want to propose something a little bit almost biographical about this, which is that, is this text suggesting something biographical about William Beckfords' relationship with his own queerness? When we're talking about Gothic and its representation of the horror of our lives, of what makes us as human beings terrified, I turn to this text and I turn to William Beckford's biography, and I think, how can this be anything but his own wrestling with his queerness? Now, nowhere does he say, this text is about me being queer and my relationship with it. But I think as queer people and queer scholars, like myself and others, we see something very universal in this, very powerful and charging about the deprivation of pleasure and the removal of it, and then the inability to fully capture that essence again. When you stand in opposition, where people are embarrassed of your queerness, where people don't want you to be queer, your own family stands in opposition of that. Like we see with Coranthus, like we see with the wives. Vathek is desiring, and he is being removed of that desire. The stranger is presenting him something beautiful that he's never before seen before, that's capturing every ounce of curiosity in his body that he cannot shake. Without it, he's depressed. He feels nothing. That stranger is offering him insight into a world, a brand new world for which he may exist. When we look at that as a queer text, as Jose Munoz presents in his essay, like Cruising Queer Utopia, queerness as a horizon, queerness as a movement, queerness as something that we're not fully yet, but we're on the track to becoming. When we look at Vathek and his relationship, is that he's presented with the opportunity to be queer, to be himself, to pursue this curiosity that has captivated him, this new outlet of life, and he's and then presented with opposition towards that. How can we read this as anything but biographical? And Beckford, I always think about this, is that William Beckford, he was rich. He had money. He had power in a political office. And he tarnished it. He tarnished it because he could not stray from his desire, from his sexuality, from his homosexuality, from his queerness. And that lust resulted in his humiliation and his fall. And when we think about Vathek and his descent into hell because of his inability to satisfy his desire, I always wonder, how is this anything but biographical? Is this the horror that William Beckford is imagining for himself? Because obviously he gets in trouble for being queer much later in his life, but He wrote this very early on, so he's almost foreshadowing his own demise in a way, in which William Beckford is terrified of the consequences of being queer. And we look at the Gothic genre as writing about the horror as a storytelling element, as the moving factor in a story. And Beckford's relationship with the horror is seemingly very intimate. It's something that he fears in his own life very closely. And it kind of manifests into this work. I especially like the relationship between Vathek and his mother, in which the mother is constantly removing Vathek from objects of his desire. She's constantly in opposition of him. And she wants him to keep descending. And to me, it reads to me as in a queer text as a resistance to his queerness, as a means to diminish it or subsidize it into a box in which it may fit. And we see Vathek cannot bottle this desire. He can't satisfy it. So, of course, it's like a gas, like heating a gas up. It's going to expand. It's going to explode. Vathek is unable to stomach this desire, and he just keeps descending. And it really tells about the human's capacity to resist, to illusionize itself and its desires, and to avoid that. And human sexuality. And I think Vathek Vathek as a text is presenting us a very intimate reading of what queerness looked like in the 18th century, about how terrifying it would have been to be queer and the oppositions that you face, yet also the spectacle of it, the possibility of an existence in which queerness is able to be explored and able to be defined and able to be marveled at without opposition, without mortification of others. And I think there's something really beautiful in that text. And within Gothic literature as a whole, the power it enables queerness to exist in literature is so pioneering for its time. I mean, we're following a time after the Enlightenment, after the Romantics, in which queerness is not on the table for discussion. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety about what masculinity and femininity look like, but queerness as a sexuality is considered like grotesque, monstrous. I think Eve Kosofsky defines in her essay about queerness and defining queerness in Gothic literature and stuff, about how anxiety is changing around masculinity and femininity. So then any representation of nonconformity is inherently queer. And then I always point to another quote from that essay in which the scholar Finch points out that like monstrous and bestial were used to describe queerness in the 18th century. I mean, it's not like queerness was not a word. So this was described as like an act of abomination, as an act of some type of bestial relationship, of some monstrous desire. And then it kind of manifests into Gothic, because Gothic is the embracement of the monstrous. It's the embracement of the terrible, the horror, the fantastical elements of it, the supernatural. And right here, queerness is not inherently natural. So is queerness inherently goth? They kind of coexist with each other symbiotically. And looking at William Beckford and looking at his past and his biographics, it's completely reasonable to assume that this text has some type of biographical significance in his life. And it carries in it some type of queer anxiety of the constant opposition you face as a result of your queer desire as a queer person. I think that it's so haunting as a piece of literature because it was written in 1786 and the themes in it are still relevant to today. I mean, you present it to a queer person and with the themes, they're able to recognize it as a queer text because this is something universal experienced by queer people. We are constantly in opposition of our existence, of the need to validate our existence and the constant opposition we face as a result of society's ignorance towards our desire and the refusal from others to accept that our desire is not a mimicry, but an authentic desire, and that it has the capability for admiration and love and is not just lustful. And I think this really illustrates it in such a way that takes a queer lens to analyze and understand. And I think that's what I find so captivating about Gothic literature, is that it allows space for the monstrous to become beautiful, as in Frankenstein, as Carmilla, as in Dracula. You have these monstrous, bestial, violent creations, these violent beings, able to be expressed in a manner of beauty and a manner of power. They're taking responsibility in their own lives. And we see Vathek attempt to do this, but he is just constantly in opposition. And I think that is so relevant to the queer experience and to queer theory as a literary theory and as a field of study. So in conclusion, William Beckfords' Vathek contributes to the queer literary canon by conveying themes of diminished desire, of society's anxiety towards queerness and towards queer desire and towards queer sexuality, and society's rejection of that, and how the rejection of desire leads to descent into madness, descent into hell, the deterioration of man. Which is a lot to grasp, I know, where we started was pretty far from that, but I hope this made sense. I hope you can understand the relevancy of this, and I don't know, queer theory is so special to me, and I think Gothic literature is such a beautiful space for it to exist, and such a good place to find fossils of queer identity and queer fragments in Gothic literature that show us how queerness is immortal. It's everlasting. You cannot get rid of it. I mean, this text is 2 centuries old. More than that, like over 2 centuries old. And the way that its themes are still relevant to today is terrifying, but it's also liberating in a way for queer people. It's proof that we've existed and that we've always existed, and that queerness is a constant navigation of this, a navigation of desire and acceptance and recognition of self. And I think there's something so beautiful in that, and that we can be uncovered by the queerness and by continuing to study queer texts and apply meaning to them as queer people and as scholars in general. And everybody should be close to reading text and reading 18th century literature, because there's always something more there. There always is. Just look harder. Okay? I hope everyone has a great winter. You guys have a great December. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.